Welcome back, Ceramics 1. This is your how to throw a cylinder video. Your first assignment is throwing a 5-inch cylinder, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But before we get to our cylinder and our throwing techniques, I want to take a look back at our wheel. This is what your wheel looks like after you're done centering or you've taken your work off the wheel. And it's all messy and grimy. And we're going to clean it off. Do not use your wooden rib. It ruins the rib, damages the edges and the points, and then the ribs don't work quite as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to turn your wheel on, you're going to take the back of your thumb and run it across this wheel and get up all those chunks of clay that are left over from your pot and put them into your throwing bucket. Then, because those can get recycled, and I recycle all the clay for our class. Then get your throwing sponge, get it nice and wet, so that if you just gently squeeze, water will come out of it, and gently rub it over the top. You don't need to shove it down. You don't need to ruin the sponge. If you have enough water on your sponge, it'll just kind of glide that clay away. All right? Now, take your sponge, rinse it off a couple times in your throwing bucket so it's nice and clean, and then squeeze it out real good so it's dry. Wipe that wheel head off, and you're good to go. If it's still just a little bit wet, you'll notice that and mine is a little wet, just kind of seeing it. You can take a paper towel, a fresh paper towel, and wipe it off and make sure it's good and dry. Okay, so every time you start throwing, your wheel should look like this. It should be dry, it should be clean, and there shouldn't be anything left on there. Okay, now let's talk about our cylinder and other throwing techniques. All right, so right here we've got kind of our cylinder lineup. Now, in ceramics, there are two kinds of forms. There's a cylindrical form, which has vertical walls. This is going to turn into a cup, a mug, a vase, any number of vertical cylindrical forms. The other form that we have is an open form, aka the bowl, which looks something like this. All right, and we'll talk more about bowls on the next assignment, but I want you to know the difference because this is one of the questions on your test, so listen closely. When you're throwing a cylinder, you give pressure with the outside hand. If you're right-handed, the right hand. Okay, left hand, you'd give it with the left hand. So your dominant hand, the one that's on the outside. For a bowl, you're giving the pressure with your non-dominant hand, the one that's on the inside, and you're pulling the clay this way. So the answers on the test is, what hand do you use to pull a cylinder? The outside dominant hand. What do you use to make a bowl? Non-dominant inside hand. Okay, that's the answer on your test. Now, going back to our cylinder. The wheel is like a big screw. As this screw is turning around, this thread is getting higher and higher and higher and higher all the way up. And this is kind of the method that we're using to move the clay from the bottom of the wheel up the top of the edge of that cylinder. Okay? So, starting, you're going to center, you're going to open, and we'll talk about those two things. But then as you're throwing, this is the method I want you to do. Butterfly fingers. Left hand inside, non-dominant. Right hand on the outside, dominant. You're going to be pushing underneath, pinching together, and pulling upwards. Okay, and the language that I will use with you is giving pressure on the outside, receiving pressure on the inside, and pinching together, and then pulling up. Okay, this will be our first pull. You can see the clay is a little thicker, it's a little shorter. And what you're going to do is you're going to make this lump of clay with your outside hand below, inside hand above, and you're going to pinch that clay up. Once you've done your first pull, it looks something like this. Now this one is partial way. I'm like halfway through this pull. I'm going to press together at the bottom. I'm going to lift up slowly, 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 all the way up to the top. Then my third and final pull, I'll pull that clay. I'll have to reach my whole hand on the inside. You'll notice I can't just get my fingers in. It's not deep enough anymore. So I have to leave the opening wide enough that I can get my hand all the way in. I can pinch together and bring that clay upwards all the way up to the top so that this wall is nice and even and the floor is nice and even. Then, once you master making the cylinder, then you shape that cylinder to be an elegant mug or vase or something else. Okay? So, the steps are butterfly fingers, dominant hand on the outside, non-dominant on the inside, and you're giving pressure on the outside, receiving it on the inside, and pulling upwards. Okay? Now, in the next video, I'm going to have the clay out on the wheel head, and I'm going to show you each part of the steps. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.